Hey, welcome to Yogi Cycle Service. I am Yogi. I'm joined here today with Chuck and Chuck's bike. And we are going to do an oil change on a VRod. So that's what we got coming up today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dig it. On a VRod, a little bit different than a Softail. Softail, you got 3 different spots, or even a touring bike, or even a Sportster for that matter. 3 different spots where you'll put the oil in, either in your primary, your transmission, or in the oil pan. On a VRod, very similar to like a metric bike, like a Kawasaki, where you have 1 spot. So all the oil for this all comes out of 1 drain plug located in the front corner of this. So we got the camera set up on this side of the bike, so we'll be doing all the work from this side of the bike. The important thing to remember too is Chuck pointed out to me there is a shield on the bottom of the oil filter. We'll have to remove that in order to get access to the oil filter, but first we can just go ahead and pull the drain plug and get the oil emptied while we wait for it to cool off. So let's go ahead and get our socket. Socket, ratchet, and what size is that? Do you remember?
17 millimeter.
17 millimeter. All right.
Metric.
Metric.
And yes, tight, like they should. There we go.
All right. There we go. Here's a towel. Towels for your hands.
Okay.
So, while it's draining, let's talk some smack about some oil.
Smack about some oil. All right.
Personally, I use Mobil 1 oil made for motorcycles. Let me go grab a quart.
Well, he's grabbing a quart. Some drain plugs have a magnet on it. Good when you pull it out, clean it off, look at it. You will see some stuff on it. You don't want to see big pieces or chunks. If you see that, think what it might be, if you can identify it or talk to somebody that might know. Sometimes it's not bad, sometimes it is.
Awesome. So let's compare some oil. Let's talk oil for a minute.
All right.
So personally, I kind of enjoy the Mobil 1 2050. I usually get it from Walmart, Wally World.
Wally World.
I see you got the AMSOIL 2050 oil. What makes you choose AMSOIL?
The reason I started using AMSOIL is when I got the bike, it was a new thing. I got it in 2007. This whole design was only a few years old. It was completely different than what Harley normally had. I know people in the metric world swear by Mobil 1, and there's Bel-Ray and a couple others. But I was in racing, and AMSOIL was big in that, and that's kind of why I went with AMSOIL.
Okay, all right. Any problems with Mobil 1?
No. Anytime you pay for an oil, I got 5 quarts and a filter from Harley Davidson. It was almost $90, so hence saving the labor. Anytime you pay for a quality oil, what you're paying for is the additive packages that are in the oil. It doesn't tell you what's in there, but there are numbers on the back. On the back here, these letters and numbers tell you what the oil API, that's the company that grades the oil, what they are. I'm sure these are all the latest. In fact, SL is the latest. But that's the additive packages in the oils. Motorcycle oil is different than automotive oil. 2050, they don't make for cars anymore. You can, but it's racing. But your street oils are different. I lost the motor in my shovel head thinking, hey, car oil's great. No, had a lifter go bad. So oil's important, using the proper oil or within the spec. Harley Davidson says if you don't have 2050, you can use 1540. But they highly recommend 2050 in this motor. I run straight 60 weight in my shovel head because it's a performance bike. It's 10.5 to 1 compression, ported heads, big cam. So I use a much heavier oil. I also run an oil cooler on it to help that. But that's another can of worms.
Another video.
Another video.
Well, let me ask this. How
Yes.
about for like my Fat Boy, where I have a separate primary from separate transmission from separate oil pan? Is it okay to use this weight and oil in all three spots? The reason why I asked that is because Harley came out with that Sin 3 blend,
Right.
which to me seems very much just like this.
Yes.
And they say you can put that in all three spots. For a while they said that. Then it seemed kind of like they recanted that a little bit and then went back to a tranny fluid.
Yeah, there was some question about the clutch and the transmission. The synthetic oils are much more, have a broader range of use than a conventional non-synthetic, and that's what Sin 3 was. It was your synthetic motor oil. As far as specific oils, it's kind of like anything else. You know, I come from the school of each oil has its own specific use. Engine produces heat and has a certain kind of friction. Your primary is basically a chain and a clutch, so you got to deal with the clutch dust that gets in, and it's not dust when it's wet, but the clutch wear material when it gets in there. And then your transmission is gears that constantly have that, gear to gear pressure on them. So each one has its own thing. Can you have an oil that covers all of that? Yeah, because not to sound goofy, but Harley isn't that performance bike where you're trying to get that top end out of everything. As you start adding performance parts to your bike, you might want to think, hey, do I need it? I put this, performance clutch in there. Does it need a different oil? I put a Jim's transmission in there or a Baker's transmission in there. Does it need a specific oil? I put a hot rod motor in it. Does it need something different? So at that point, you might want to think. But as far as stock, like untouched, or maybe I guess they call it stage one, I think it's all the same. And your riding style would have something to do. If you're the guy that's gonna jackrabbit from light to light, you might think something different. If you're just cruising all the time, or the wife's with you, stock oil's fine.
Right. Because I had, my Fat Boy has 100,000 miles, and I've pretty much been using this in all three. I did put a cam in it recently, but I'm still kind of using all three in the same.
100,000 miles on a Harley, and that's Evo?
And now it's a twin cam.
Twin
it's
cam?
a 2003.
Okay, so it's a twin cam.
Yeah.
And
I haven't had any problems, and it's running like a champ.
The reason I said Evo or asked Evo is the cam and an Evolution motor and a shovel head and a pan head, all the pre-motors, had one camshaft, and the cam is like this in the motor, and you have a lifter real close to the engine and one real far, and you get a push rod that goes on this far angle to get to that valve rocker, and it puts excessive pressure. That's the one that broke in my shovel head. But it puts excessive pressure, and that's why I asked. But 100,000 miles, that's not, nothing to say, oh, I have an oil failure. That's probably just normal use, no matter any quality oil.
Now, I did have twice, I had cam bearings disintegrate in there, and I've rebuilt the cam chest twice now. But I really don't think that was oil.
Harley, the early ones, they had a problem, and there was a lot of recalls because of the tensioners, and the cams would start with the tension. When the tensioner would fail, that chain would get loose, and your cams would start wiggling around. And I think that my personal thought is I think that created a difference, because the bearing would have the cam bearing would be turning in one direction with the cam on it. It would turn in one direction, and if it's bouncing, that bearing would actually stop, turn backwards, stop, and turn the other way, as that cam would bounce in there. So I think that's where the premature came from. I'm not an engineer. It's just my own personal thought on that.
Okay. All right. Well, we got the oil drained in this.
Yeah, it looks like the
We're
oil's
good to
out.
go.
Now here on the VRod, a little different than some of the other drain plugs. The VRod doesn't use a drain plug gasket. It actually uses pipe Teflon that you would put on pipe threads, and that's what seals it. So we'll be putting that on there. I I know you said you were talking about doing symmetric bikes and other ones. I'm not familiar enough with that, but I do know like a Honda car, you're not supposed to reuse the drain plug gasket. They're aluminum, they're one-time use. If you pull it off, it's aluminum gasket. A little bit of this may help, but that gasket's made to be disposable. So something to look into if you're doing, but I don't know if the bike motorcycle end has that. But I do know the car end has that.
Okay.
But the copper one's fully reusable. Okay. So on these, you just want to clean the old stuff out. You know, Teflon, it pretty much wipes off pretty easily. It doesn't dry. You don't want to use a semi-hardening one. But depend on the lore of who you talk to. You know, the machine tolerancers were so good because Porsche made it.
Yeah, this is not a Harley, this is a Porsche.
This is a Porsche. So you just want to clean it off, and then I'm going to have to open this up because this is brand new, because I knew Tim wouldn't have any, because he first VRod.
Well, I have Teflon tape like a plumber would have.
You don't want to use it. I'm glad you said Teflon tape. You want to be very careful using Teflon tape on anything. You'll see people put it on brake lines and clutch lines and all. You want to be very careful, because when you wrap the Teflon tape, I know you've seen those little strings come off. Those little strings can be, lethal in there. Like they can create havoc. Like your clutch, your brake lever that was sticking, you could get Teflon tape back in there and cause those kind of problems.
Okay.
So you want to be very careful using Teflon tape, and same thing there. Now in a motor, that little bit piece probably won't make a difference. Brake and clutch systems, yours, mine, it doesn't matter.
And where'd you get that from?
My daughter, she sold Cutco.
No, not the knife, the tape, the Teflon.
Oh. I thought you wanted to know about the
Let me
knife.
see the knife though. While you're... Pretty sweet.
Home Depot, Lowe's, they got it in the plumbing center. It's like $4 for a little tube. It'll probably last you a lifetime if you're doing oil changes.
That's the same place I get my Loctite from. All my Loctite comes from Home Depot and Lowe's.
Yep.
I like I was talking about, well, we did a video last week on a lowering blocks that is in editing right now. We're getting ready to release, but it's more like it's the blue Loctite. It's more like a gel, and you twist the bottom.
You twist. It looks like chapstick.
Yeah,
it's like a chapstick.
I like that much better than the blue liquid stuff.
They each work well. The problem, I'll be honest with you, the problem with Loctite is people put way too much on. It's like crazy glue. You just want a little drop, and that's what it's for. If you're ever in a bind where you don't have Loctite, you know what else works pretty good? Fishing string. Wrap some fishing string around the thread and put it in, and that'll give you the bind. Don't use it on heat because it'll just melt out. But like if you got like a cover or something that's rattling and the bolt keeps loosening up, you put some fishing line around it.
Good to know.
So I'll just put a little bit of this on there. I'll wipe off the oil pan where this seats up.
I probably should be doing this for you, but I know nothing about the VRod mechanics. Is the first one that's ever been in this garage.
It might be the only one that's ever been in your driveway.
It probably is, except for the last time you came over.
Yeah. Dad, there's strange people out here on motorcycles. What do they look like? Oh, it's just Chuck.
I know, that's just Chuck. He's fine, he's safe. So after we get the plug back in, take off that shroud.
And we'll do the oil filter.
We'll do the filter, fill her up, and you'll be good.
Yep. I always make the joke, being a mechanic, I get cars that come in, the drain plug's so tight, like if it falls out, something bad will happen.
Yeah.
All right, so you just want to wipe off the excess Teflon, and Make sure you put the cap back on it, because if you step on it, it goes all over and it don't go back in the tube. I don't know why. I don't know how they get it in there. I can't get it back in.
Alright, so next is taking off.
All right, next is this shroud underneath, which we actually did pre-break loose the bolts, but they're 13 millimeter. There's 2 of them, and it's a little guard that protects the oil filter and
Like a skid plate.
yeah. It will come
I'm
down.
off on this side.
Okay, and it's, believe it or not, it's actually the mount for the lower radiator shroud.
Okay.
But that's what we're pulling off. There's little rubber grommets in here. If these grommets are bad, this is a good time to think about replacing them. Then we could get up in here and get to the oil filter.
I got an oil filter wrench if you want that.
I brought one because, again, I didn't know if you were set for a VRod. Oil filter pliers. Just need to get in there and
Put a little quarter spin on it.
yep.
Quarter, halfway spin.
We'll talk about that in a second. This could be a more expensive oil change. I could have bought the chrome oil filter.
You know, interesting you mentioned that, because actually get all my oil filters off of Amazon. The black ones are K&N filters, and they're $10 each. And the chrome ones off Amazon, K&N, are like 15 each.
Well, this was 10 from Harley. So
I figure, why would I put a chrome one?
well, it depends on the bike. Like they asked me, and this is all black, so a black one's fine. But if I had a CVO, I might think about a chrome. If this was all chrome in here, that black filter would probably stick out.
Go ahead and toss that.
Okay. All right.
Awesome.
I'm going to pull out the oil filter now. We're going to talk about this for a second or two.
So you got a Fram oil filter, right? No.
Yeah, Fram, Harley Fram Davison. It was Fram Harley. There's a gasket on here. You want to put a little bit of lube on the gasket. And you heard Tim mention turn it a quarter turn. When you put the oil filter on and you turn it, it's going to butt up to whatever it's against. I've seen people go in there and they want to keep turning and turning and turning until they can't turn it anymore. That's improper. It's somewhere between a quarter, a third, and a quarter turn. When it touches, stop. This gasket is made for expansion. As the motor gets hot and cool, that's what this gasket's made for. So when you get in there and you tighten it down, that gasket's not doing its job, and you can actually have metal on metal. And although you've tightened it down, if it loosens up, that gasket's over crushed and your filter can fall off. Seen it happen. I tightened the death out of it, over tightened it. There's a reason that it's like that. So you do want to put a little oil on it. It helps it tighten and come back off. If you put them on dry, you'll know because it's really tight coming off. It's not because somebody over tightened it. This filter actually goes on sideways. Some of them go on this way. Some will go on this way. Me personally, if the filter goes on like this, I'll pre-fill it. Going on sideways, you're not going to get enough, that little bit of oil you get in there is nominal, so it doesn't matter. And then you just got a better chance of making a mess.
Let me get you some oil.
Yep. So just a little on your finger. Just wipe it around there. And then we'll screw it on.
So now I know how to do a VRod. Next time you come over, you can sit and have a cup of coffee and I'll do the work.
There we go. Let me get this really tight. It looks like I'm getting it tighter than I am because there's not a whole lot of room in here to work. There we go.
Cool.
All right, and then we'll put that shroud back on. Now there's, get it, We're back on the lower shroud. Okay.
Is it? Yeah.
Now, I told you that I used automotive oil in
Yep.
my shovel head.
Yeah.
We had racing oil from the race shop that I worked at, and it was supposed to be this really great 10W30, and it did not last that long in my shovel. I had about 8,000 miles and it ate the lifter up.
Oh, wow.
So that's when I said, you know what? They make the oil that I run in there, believe it or not, is the same stuff that you would run in a 10,000 horsepower top fuel dragster.
Really?
Yep. It's a straight 60 weight oil, but it's synthetic. And I know we've been talking synthetic and conventional. The biggest advantage of synthetic is its cold flow ability. Within normal heat range, if your motor started hot all the time, like 100 degrees or hotter all the time, that wouldn't make much of a difference. And as long as your motor's within its operating temperature, there's really not much of an advantage between like a 5W30 synthetic and a 5W30 conventional. But when you get outside that operating temperature, long idle in traffic, all that work on 85, we've been there.
Yeah.
Cold temperatures, it was 28 degrees last night.
Yeah.
That's where the synthetic really makes a difference. But
Yeah. Well, I noticed the biggest difference. So we go to Rolling Thunder every year, and one year we went there to Rolling Thunder. It was probably 95 degrees out in DC, and sitting there idling for extended periods of time. When the one year I went, and I was running dinosaur oil at that time, it seemed like it would overheat quicker. Then the next year when I was up there, I was running synthetic in a similar situation. It seemed like it gave me a little bit more time before the engine started overheating.
yes, and again, in that normal operating temperature, if you were to ride out to Washington D.C. and back, you wouldn't know a difference.
Right.
But when you get into those adverse conditions, extended idling, slow rolling, whatever it may be, that's where the synthetic
The
really
viscosity
makes
of
right.
it.
Well, it doesn't. Again, it's the additive package doesn't break down as quickly. It's able to absorb more, work better within a larger range. But if you're in that normal operating temperature and everything's normal, in 3,000 miles, you're not going to see a difference between one oil or another.
Right.
If you're doing synthetic oil changes and you're changing your oil every 3,000 miles in a stock vehicle, send me the extra money.
Right.
But I didn't do it from the beginning, so I don't do it now. But there's at least there used to be, and maybe they don't anymore. There was a code that was stamped in here. If you wrote the code down with your oil change, AMSOIL would guarantee no engine oil related failure. They would cover the
As long
problem.
as it was properly changed.
As long as it was properly changed.
Documented.
If you use their oil and their filter, they say you can double your oil change mileage. So this is a $90 oil change. I'm using a Harley filter. I can change just the filter in 5,000 miles. I'm going to change the oil. But if you're worrying about being a little frugal, or you don't, you're not pushing the bike, they say stock, you can double it. The further away you get from stock, the shorter that time span comes.
So with synthetic oil, you're changing your oils roughly every 5,000.
Yeah, that's that's Harley's recommendation.
Okay.
I will be honest, I've gone 7,500. Again, I don't have any problem. I was on a VRod forum. Guys were going 10,000 miles on stock bikes without, changing. And some of these guys were putting 10,000 miles on in a summer. They were riding it off, and The first year I had the bike, I put 14,000 miles on it. Since then, I've only put another 14,000 miles on it. I went from working 20 miles from home to 3. So,
Yeah. Right on. But for those using the dinosaur model, the dinosaur oil, still every 2,500 to 3,000.
yeah, it's still 3,000. Again, if you think about it, I don't know the Harley oil price for their standard oil, but I do know that like their Sin 3 is almost the same price as the AMS oil. And if you're not crazy about Harley, I believe Texaco actually makes their oil. It's not made by Harley Davidson. Harley says this is what we need, and it's built to that spec. AMS oil obviously isn't built specifically for, but you could say it says V-twin. Tim grabbed the other. Where's your mobile one? It also says V-twin on it. You're not going to see, Hayabusa 20W50. But I do know that there are some that specifically say air-cooled or
Water-cooled.
Water-cooled. Some of that's marketing gimmick. Some of it is real. But, if you get one that says V-twin for your V-twin, you're fine.
Bottom line, buy what's right for your bike.
Right. Buy what's right for your bike. Don't put car oil in your bike. If that's all you could get at a convenience store and you're low on oil, yeah, but that's not your oil change.
Right. That's an emergency situation
Right.
to get you home. And
Yeah.
then go ahead and do the oil change once you get home. If you've done that, flush
Right.
it out. And
Yep, flush it out.
and fill it back up.
Yeah. Now you talked about flush it out. There was a whole movement about putting oil in your bike and starting it up and draining it out.
I remember.
Waste, absolute waste. There's less than 2 ounces of oil that's residual in all the little passages in here. Out of 5 quarts, a gallon and a quart of oil. To have that little bit, you're really not contaminating the oil.
Once you shut it off, it all drains down, doesn't it? Down to the pan.
Most of it will drain back down to the pan. There's so many of these things that sound great on paper, as we say. In real life, you're wasting money. You're wasting time.
People, I leave the plug out and I start it up and spit the last little bit out and shut it off and fill it up.
No, you're not doing yourself any favor.
Yeah, gotta go get you more.
I'm going to talk about the dipstick here in a second. Now, I've done enough oil changes. I know it takes 5 quarts. When I bought the bike, one of the things that I was upgraded to was a dipstick with a temperature gauge in it. It was not necessary. Again, racing background, I got to know all this. It's a racing bike, in my mind. But not necessary. The biggest problem with it, it's very difficult to read how much oil's in it. You really need to know what you're looking at with that. The factory one, simple as anything. And I'll show you the difference in a second.
I had a temp gauge oil on my Fat Boy, had a thermostat on it. And that's when I knew in DC that I was running into problems, because when I was sitting idling in traffic, I just saw it go. And I was like, time to shut this down.
Well, I rode this to Cocoa Beach, Florida, which is right at 600 miles. And we got in a dead, shut down 95 traffic in Georgia. And with the fan, this is water cooled or liquid cooled. Between the radiator, the top 2/3 of the radiator is a radiator. The bottom third is actually an oil cooler. And let me tell you, people say, "Oh, it's so much nicer being on a liquid cooled bike when you're sitting in traffic." No, because these fans actually blow the heat on you.
Yeah, the same happens with my Ultra.
It will blow the heat on you.
Awesome.
So, Now, while we're doing an oil change, when you're on a lift, I mean, I go over my bike often. I know what's going on. I know what's here. But when you're doing an oil change and you have an opportunity to have it on a lift and do that, it's at a good height to look at things. I know I have a small oil leak happening down here that's, common on these. You can see my finger's a little dirty.
Right by your stator plug.
Yep. That's kind of common, and it's common on all Harleys because you got rubber going into oil. But while you're doing an oil change, some things to think about checking are your tire pressures, your belt or chain, looking at your brakes because now's the time to do it while you're doing it. Again, like I said, I'm all over it all the time anyway.
So yes, and with that said, we're going to probably do a video in the next couple weeks on what's called T-clocks for transmission. There's like clutch. I don't remember what each of the acronym is, but it's pretty much going over the entire bike and doing an inspection of it. So my buddy has a Victory. He's going to bring his Victory down. We're going to do a T-clocks inspection on that and cover all the different areas and points on doing a full inspection on it. But you make a good point. While you're up here doing this,
now's the time
to check
air filter, your battery, and Tim did a great video on battery. Tim and James did a great video on the batteries. But I'm going to show you here up close, and James, if it's good, you can see how this is smooth. There's nothing on there. See how this is smooth? There's nothing on there. Oil doesn't stick to it, and hot oil sticks to it less. This one has these ridges in it, so when you pull it out, the oil actually sticks in those ridges, and you can read it. So if you get an aftermarket dipstick, something to look at. This one's actually from Harley. It's got a temperature gauge in it. This is the factory one, but that makes a difference. So when I was first doing it, I did the oil change and I figured out where it was, and I put some marks and used some sandpaper. I know what I'm looking at when I pull it out. Somebody else won't, but not always necessary to have a temperature gauge on a bike like this.
Good here.
Yep. Now, something else you'll see on here, it says check oil warm. That doesn't mean start it up. Let it run for a minute, shut it off. If it says check warm, you want to let it idle for about 15 minutes or so before you check it. Even a ride around the block. If it's on the dipstick in the safe area, you're good. That's just a final check. But I'm not going to check it with this because I already know where I'm at, because like I said, I've done a bunch of oil changes already.
Cool.
See the oil on it? I can't either. And then you'd start it, to be proper, you would start it up, make sure there's no leaks, so we'll do that. Tim, can you turn the switch on there?
Yeah. Key. I need your key.
No, just turn it.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go to run.
You're in neutral.
Nope. Now we are. You only got to start it up till the oil light goes out. Once the oil light's out, there's oil through the system. You don't have to let it run and run and run. There's oil through the system. Something you do when you start it up, listen. You want to make sure you're not hearing anything crazy, like the oil filter blowing oil out, something else going on. So, that's kind of why you start up, then you check the oil level and, verify. But like I said, I already know where it is, and you can't see it on the stick anyway.
And nothing's dripping out.
Nothing's dripping out. When you're done, when Tim moved the pan, you do want to make sure that there's no oil, so you're not going, was that there before or not? Know your surroundings when you're doing it. But that is an oil change on a VRod.
That's it.
That's it.
That's all we got for today. So we thank you for joining Yogi Cycle Service. Ask you to like, subscribe, share the links. Don't forget the Orphan Run coming up April 6th out at Speedway Harley-Davidson in Concord, North Carolina. Hope to see you there, and thank you for joining us today, and have a great weekend. See ya.